There are very few directors like Steven Spielberg. For over 50 years, his films have embedded themselves into the fabric of popular culture in a way that's made him synonymous with movie making itself. He's credited with inventing the blockbuster genre with Jaws, but he's also the man behind deeply emotional works like Schindler's List and Saving Private Ryan. He's somehow managed to conquer the box office as much as he's been able to conquer the critical acclaim.
The Oscar goes to, this is a big surprise, Steven Spielberg for Schindler's List.
One of my favorite things about film as an art form is that you can watch it two ways at once. On one hand, you can watch it as its own piece of entertainment, and on the other, you can watch it as a window into a director's specific interests. Sometimes that becomes clearest right at the beginning of a career, before the big budgets and spectacle, when all a director really has is their ideas and a few limited resources to bring them to life. Scorsese's Mean Streets is basically a rough draft of Goodfellas. Del Toro's Cronos, a film about a man desperately clinging to eternal life, contains the seed of almost everything he'd spend the next 30 years making. I was actually listening to an interview with director Matt Johnson, who talked about the specific quality film has where you can watch it in this multiple layered way.
Cinema and magic, live magic, to me are the only two art forms where you can watch them twice at the same time, where you're watching the story, watching the characters, and you're appreciating it on that level, but you can also watch it at the meta level at the exact same time and ask yourself, well, how did they do this? Why are they doing this? How's the director doing this trick? Is this real? Which is my favorite question when I'm watching a movie.
This reminded me of why I love trying to dissect the specific viewpoints of directors themselves. It allows you to watch a film not just for that first layer of entertainment, but for that secondary layer of a director's personal vision coming through in their art. So with Spielberg's Disclosure Day just freshly released, I wanted to rewind all the way to the start, to look at his first film, Duel, and unlock some of the stories that lay underneath his whole career. I could of course walk you through Spielberg's entire childhood, how he started making short films with his father's 8mm camera, the backyard productions he put on for his family, the moment The Greatest Show on Earth apparently changed everything in his mind. But honestly, The Fabelmans does that better than I can. What's more interesting is where he was just before everything exploded. In the early 1970s, Spielberg was a television director. He'd helmed 11 projects of varying lengths, ranging from standard episodic work, but also longer near feature-length pieces for shows like Columbo and The Name of the Game. It's not the most glamorous entry point into a career, but it was a pressure cooker that made him familiar with the way the studio system ran. Television also taught him how to work fast, how to do more with less, and how to hold an audience's attention without the safety net of a theatrical runtime. By this point in his career, his name was already circulating inside Hollywood. People were paying attention to his talents, and then, almost by accident, a secretary handed him a short story from Richard Matheson called Duel. It's the kind of origin story that sounds too neat to be true, but sometimes the right material just finds the right director at exactly the right moment. The setup for Duel could not be simpler. David Mann, a traveling salesman, is driving home from a routine business trip. He overtakes a slow-moving gas truck on the highway, thinks nothing of it, and then the truck roars back past him. And then it slows down again, and then it speeds up. It takes Mann a while to accept what's actually happening in front of him, but the film doesn't wait for him to catch on. We can tell immediately whoever is driving this truck clearly wants him dead. What follows is essentially a 90-minute chase scene, and what's really worth paying attention to here is what Spielberg withholds. We never see the driver's face, only the bottom of a pair of cowboy boots and a hand resting on the wheel. In doing so, the truck itself becomes the antagonist, and there's something genuinely unsettling about that because it strips evil of any motive or backstory. The truck itself can't contain anger. It isn't anything. It just pursues man for a seemingly endless stretch of the highway. The film taps into something primal, the fear that bad things don't need a reason to happen to you. Shot in 13 days on a TV budget, Duel has no business looking as good as it does. Credit goes to cinematographer Jack A. Marta, whose images keep finding new angles on the same stretch of desert highway, a road that should feel repetitive but yet it never does. Richard Matheson, who adapted his own short story, had meticulously mapped the route in the screenplay, which gave Spielberg a visual logic to work from, and the decision to have Dennis Weaver actually drive for most of the shoot gives the film a texture that no amount of production value can replicate. 4 years before Jaws, Spielberg was already doing the thing that would define him, taking something completely ordinary and making it the most terrifying object in the room. There's also a deeper layer running underneath the chase, and it has nothing to do with the vehicle chasing man down itself. Duel is also a film about masculinity, specifically the gradual erosion of it. Spielberg telegraphs this from the opening minutes. A voice on the car radio jokes nervously about manhood. In another scene, man argues with his wife over the phone about a situation where he failed to stand up for himself. Even the title itself is setting this theme up. A duel is the oldest masculine ritual in the Western tradition, two men settling something the old-fashioned way. And then there's the name, David Mann. Spielberg isn't exactly being subtle here. What makes it interesting is the portrait of the man itself. Man isn't a coward exactly, but he's been domesticated. He's comfortable, cautious, and really a creature of routine. The wide open highway, which should feel like freedom, instead becomes the one place he can't manage or negotiate his way out of. There's no office politics here, just him and whatever is behind that windshield. And if you read it as a film about masculinity, the choice of antagonist becomes pointed. The challenge that man is facing is that of a machine, and not just any machine, but a faceless, industrial one as well. At a press conference in Rome in September 1973, a 26-year-old Steven Spielberg described Duel as, quote, an indictment of machines, a fight for survival between man and machine-made danger. His description of the protagonist is just as telling. He called him typical of that lower middle-class American who's insulted by suburban modernization, a man who expects his biggest problems to be a broken television set. That framing cracks the film wide open. Man's vulnerability is psychological. He's so thoroughly softened by comfort that it heightens the sense of terror of the highway itself. It's also, in hindsight, a blueprint. This is something that Spielberg would return to many times over, the ordinary man cornered by an unstoppable force. Jaws puts a middle-class police chief in the water with a shark. Jurassic Park puts a theme park full of families in a cage with dinosaurs. The specifics may change throughout films, but the story architecture stays the same. Duel is where he first figured out that formula, and at 26 years old, shooting a TV movie in 13 days, he already had it fully formed. Another thread connecting Duel to Spielberg's broader filmography is what I'd call the looming threat. It's a simple trick, really. Put the danger in the background where the audience can see it, and keep the character completely oblivious in the foreground. That gap between what we know and what the characters know is where Spielberg finds his best work. In Duel, he does this by frequently keeping the truck idle at the edge of the frame. In Spielberg's latest film, Disclosure Day, he also finds a way to deploy this lingering threat technique. Disclosure Day is less interested in aliens or world-ending threats than the act of revelation itself. The lingering threat here is the unknown of what would happen to our social fabric if the truth was revealed. The tension doesn't come from a threat of alien invasion, but instead at the idea that the government is rushing to keep reality concealed from us. It's a poignant message and a continued evolution of the very thing that made Spielberg a superstar director in the first place. Spielberg returns to the mystery that's long obsessed him and comes to the same spiritual conclusion. Something important lies just beyond our view. That's always been the driving force of Spielberg's works. This fear of the unknown and what it does to us as humans, and what he can provoke from us as an audience by using that fear to build tension. The interesting part is that the more you look across Spielberg's career, the more his ideas seem to lead back to the experiences that shaped him early in his life. Returning to The Fabelmans, which Spielberg jokingly called his 40 million therapy project, one of the clearest things it reveals is just how much of his filmmaking begins with his childhood. The Fabelmans illustrates how the divorce of his parents hangs over much of his filmography. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Hook, AI, Minority Report, and Close Encounters all approach families drifting apart before eventually finding each other again in very different ways, but they're all asking similar emotional questions. Even when Spielberg is making these big science fiction or adventure films, he's often working through deeply personal feelings beneath it all. It's something The Fabelmans makes beautifully clear. The film suggests that growing up doesn't mean leaving those formative experiences behind, it means learning to reinterpret them. The moments that hurt us and the people we struggle to understand have a way of following us for the rest of our lives. They simply reappear in different stories. Duel reaches back to a different part of Spielberg's childhood. He once said that one of the reasons he fought so hard to direct the film was because he'd been bullied as a kid. That suddenly makes the truck feel like much more than an anonymous villain. It behaves with the same arbitrary cruelty as a schoolyard bully. It picks someone who looks vulnerable, follows him relentlessly, and takes pleasure in keeping him afraid. David Mann spends almost the entire film trying to understand why he's been chosen, while the truck offers him nothing in return except intimidation. That's what gives Duel so much of its power. Spielberg understands that being bullied isn't frightening just because of physical danger. It's frightening because it leaves you feeling powerless inside a world that suddenly stops making sense. Long before he was making films about dinosaurs, aliens, or war, he was already exploring that feeling of being small in a vast world. That's why Duel still feels so useful as a first stop for understanding Spielberg. It's a movie built from simple parts: a car, a truck, a road, and a man just trying to make it home. Yet every part of it already carries the shape of the career that followed. Spielberg throughout his whole career has taken ordinary spaces and loaded them with tension. A stretch of road becomes frightening. A regular truck starts to feel alive. Somehow, amid all that spectacle, he keeps your attention fixed on the people caught inside of it. That instinct is already fully awake within Duel. You can see him fascinated by vulnerability, by the gap between what a character thinks they're dealing with and what the audience can already sense on the horizon. You can see him draw on the American landscape as something beautiful and threatening at the same time. And you can see a director who understands that craft is meaning itself, that the camera is always doing more than recording what's in front of it. It is shaping the experience of the characters and the audiences watching them. In that sense, Duel is a small film with an enormous shadow. It gives you the early version of Spielberg's style, the first clear statement of his interests, and a lot of the emotion and visual logic he would spend decades refining. Watching it feels a bit like spotting the architect's schemes before the house even gets built. That's the pleasure of revisiting the early parts of directors' filmographies like this. You get to watch a filmmaker become himself in real time, and with Spielberg, arguably someone who's transcended the medium of film itself, it feels really special to start to peel back the things that make him tick. Maybe that's why Duel remains such a fascinating watch. For all the ways Spielberg's career would grow and change, so much of what will make him known to the world sits within this delightful 95-minute TV film. Thanks for watching. If you've watched Duel, Disclosure Day, or any other pieces of Spielberg's filmography, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. I highly recommend anyone to check out some of the gaps in their favorite directors' filmographies because they often are the most revealing pieces. I'm personally not the hugest Spielberg fan, but Duel was very much that for me, a great look into what would make him such a huge part of movie culture. For more videos like this, where I dissect the themes and ideas behind directors, cult films, and classics, please subscribe and stay tuned. Thanks again.